Welcome to PCB Chat, where we talk with experts across the printed circuit design, manufacturing, and supply chain fields. I'm Mike Buteau. I'm the president of the Printed Circuit Engineering Association. Today's guest intersects two key areas for electronics manufacturers: circularity and inventory management. These are also areas of long interest to me. As background, an early interview I did was with a Chicago-based fellow named Jerry Haller. He had an idea for a component exchange system set up much like trading financial stocks on Wall Street. He called the operation Fast Parts. He spent years trying to perfect it, to no avail, as the saying goes. A few decades later, however, this whole sustainable resource management thing might finally be catching on. Component Sense is an Edinburgh, Scotland-based company that leads electronics manufacturers toward zero waste. They take brand new, perfectly good excess components and redistribute them to other manufacturers for use. Our guest today is Kenny McGee, the chief executive of Component Sense. We're going to talk about the market for recycled electronics, and we will dive into what companies can do with excess stock. So Kenny, welcome to PCB Chat.
Hi, Mike. Thank you. That was a great introduction. I don't need to say much.
And I'll mention that where Kenny's at right now, apparently they are experiencing, what was it, Category 4 hurricane winds?
Yeah, which I don't think in my lifetime. I'm 56, so I don't think in my lifetime we've ever had such winds. So this is new. So yeah, hopefully the power stays on.
Yeah, hopefully not a bad omen for this interview. Kidding. Kenny, so over 62 million metric tons of e-waste was produced in 2022, and less than a quarter of that was recycled. Meanwhile, we have supply chains under threat of disruption due to everything from wars to politics. Many listeners have likely seen images or videos of some of the sites in Southeast Asia where local residents fish scraps of anything remotely salvageable to reclaim and sell. My understanding is that you've visited a few of these e-waste dump sites in your time. Can you tell us a bit about what you encountered?
Yeah, sure. Last September, I spent 2 weeks in Ghana, which is always renowned as the largest e-waste dump. I mean, there's sadly people fighting for that title. But Ghana is a place that came to my attention quite a while back, around about 2007. And I saw a documentary and I discovered that e-waste from my local area was somehow ending up in Ghana. Now, we're not supposed to be sending e-waste anywhere. It's meant to be managed in country, and that's been the case for a long, long time, for certainly European countries. Basel Convention set that up. The US, unfortunately, haven't signed up to that. But yeah, we're working hard to manage our waste, or we think we are, but somehow it's getting to Ghana still. So yeah, the e-waste from my local area was still getting to Ghana in that documentary. They tracked some stuff, I think it was a TV, and it ended up in this waste dump in Ghana. So that really shocked me, it horrified me, the thought that it could have been literally a product I'd taken to the amenity site, assuming it was being recycled. You know, they were certainly claiming to be recycling as much of our waste as possible at that time. And lo and behold, somehow it was ended up in Ghana. So I always wanted to do something with it. From that point onwards, it was in our slide deck. It was something we talked about when we were speaking to electronic manufacturers. If I'm honest, they weren't awfully interested at that time. You know, in those days, talking to a CFO or a CEO of an electronic manufacturing company, sustainability wasn't really top of the agenda. And thankfully, that's starting to change, but definitely wasn't the case back then. But we had a situation where, you know, our waste was ending up there, and I was quite horrified by it. I wanted to do something about it. We were a tiny company at the time, you know, probably 4 or 5 people. There's no way we could influence or impact that at the time, but it's always been in my dreams and my goals to somehow help. So we did some research maybe a year and a half ago. One of the marketing team, Vivian, came on board, and she was doing some research into that topic and to see if it was still happening, and it clearly was. She wrote an article for us And she proactively, off her own back, which was brilliant, went out and found some photographers that had been out there, that had actually been on the ground, and managed to persuade them to share some photographs with us for her article. And as soon as she showed me that, I was really impressed, but also immediately got the idea that why don't I connect with these photographers? They've been on the ground and get some real insight into what it's like out there. So that triggered a meeting where we flew an Italian journalist up from London. She lives in London, to spend the day with us so that we could ask her questions, interview her. So we did that, and we created a small documentary about that meeting. And I never spoke to her prior. Intentionally kept it all on video, so that video is available. But that was literally me just gathering more information, fresh information on what's happening on the ground out there now. And it seemed that not much had changed, and Carolina's description of it is that everything changes but nothing changes, and that's kind of how she describes that area. She's been there several times now, and by the end of that interview, so we literally filmed it live, and by the end of it, we'd already decided that I was going out with her. I think that was July, and by the September we were out there for 2 weeks on the ground and having a real look to see what was going on, because it's very complicated. The stuff shouldn't be getting there in the first place because we're not supposed to send e-waste, but it seems to be going out of the UK and Europe for sure in the guise of working electronic devices. So it is legal to move that stuff. But the reality on the ground, and there's lots of different reports about the percentage that is usable. The Ghanaian authorities are currently claiming about 80% is usable, but what we saw on the ground of containers arriving, it was more like 20% that was usable, that was working. So it's our waste. Some of it works, some of it doesn't. So they'll basically burst open a container, and there's a whole lot of guys, traders, wanting to buy that stock. And it might be TVs, it might be fridges, it might be a whole mixture of appliances in that container. And you'll have different specialists. So the TV guy he has to buy all the TVs. So he might take away 10 or 12 TVs. And it was those guys we were talking to that were saying that 20% roughly worked. The balance he would pass on. So he would sell on the balance as broken TVs. Somebody would then buy those and try and repair them. And there's a whole economy around that that's quite amazing, actually, of people that are literally piecing together one good TV out of multiple broken TVs, and yeah, it was quite cool in a way to see that angle, because we don't repair things anymore in the Western world. We just don't deem it viable. But to see people piecing together a working TV from multiple broken ones was actually quite cool from a sustainability point of view. But even then, a big chunk of that stock ends up in the e-waste dump, what's known as the e-waste dump in Agbogbloshie. And that's what you see typically on the documentary. So it's a slum area. As I say, I've seen lots of documentaries, and it's shocking on the documentary, but to see it face to face and meet the people that live there was just unbelievable. It was really, really emotional. I mean, the sheer scale of it blew me away. We walked through it day after day, pretty much every day for that 2-week period. Met the locals. We literally watched and saw how they recycle. It's pretty basic. It's pretty rough. It's the tools they use to get the copper, which is the main ingredient that they're trying to salvage out of our electronics. It's often just a chisel and a rock. And the guys are sitting there in slip-on sandals, and there's no safety, there's no health and safety at all. We saw some quite shocking damage to some of the individuals, and of course the sanitation's not particularly good. It is very much a slum area. The houses are right beside the recycling, and they do call it scrap and recycling yard, but it's you have to see the images to really get the sense of it. But it's very basic. It's just working on the dirt in the so-called workshop area. People have little kind of pens. In most cases, no roof. They're literally just working on the dirt, trying to salvage mostly copper, but there is guys that are picking up aluminium and steel, other metals. But the vast majority of it is ending up just lying around in big piles. The stuff they can't sell just lies around in great big heaps. They've got a sort of landfill almost, albeit it looks more like a mountain, and that's where everything ultimately ends up. The most shocking thing that people see is the burning, though. So to get to the copper, particularly cable and wire, they want the copper. They don't want the sleeving. They don't want the plastics. So they burn that to get to the copper. It's the fastest, cheapest method. It's obviously horrendous for the environment. And that was an ongoing, almost 24-hour, 7-day-a-week process. There was just smoke filled the whole area. It was horribly toxic. You could hardly breathe. The heat was unbearable. I mean, we were right beside these guys, talking to them and watching the process and how they live in that day in, day out. I just don't know. Your eyes were stinging. It was very uncomfortable, very, very uncomfortable. But after 2 weeks, it was surprising how you did become acclimatized. You weren't shocked by it anymore. That in itself was a little bit disturbing. By the end of the 2 weeks, we were literally sitting, not quite having tea and biscuits with the guys, but we were certainly eating biscuits. I was buying and bringing biscuits, and the guys are just hanging around in between burning cable, and the smells, the colours, even from the fires, just unbelievable. Purples and greens, the colours that you shouldn't see in a fire. Obviously, toxic chemicals from the plastics and the sleevings. I mean, most sleeving has got fire retardant. It's not meant to burn, and yet they're burning it. And one of the even bigger shocks for me was to get the heat right to burn off this fire retardant sleeving. They're adding plastic. So, literally the plastic housings create a more powerful fire, more heat. So they're adding, the foam that you get inside a refrigerator or a freezer, that foam insulation, that became fuel. The plastic housings became fuel. And that is all just going on the fire too. So it's just black smoke everywhere. And, this is, 20 yards from the houses. Albeit I'm saying houses, they're 2x2 wooden sheds that people live in. But yeah, I mean, it was quite surreal, right? So we're sitting in this burning area, the smoke's everywhere, the heat is incredible. I mean, it's a fairly hot country, but the heat from the fire was unbelievable. And there is literally people with big baskets on their heads selling biscuits and fruit and water and all kinds of things. So there is a whole quite fascinating economy kicking around there. Very organised, not officially, but it's very organised. People know what their role is, what their job is. The burners aren't the scrap guys. The scrap guys have to bring their wares to the burners. The burners then burn them and hand them back the copper, and they get paid for doing so. And it's very transactional, but super organised. There's a hierarchy, so there's chiefs in every section, and there's chiefs that run the whole show. I was really impressed in some ways at just how organised the whole operation was.
So even if some of these products that you saw are ultimately reclaimed and recycled, it's a totally inefficient solution to the entire problem, right? To the e-waste problem. We are creating these piles of pollution. So what do you see as the role of the secondary market in combating e-waste and how it's contributing to the circularity movement?
When you say secondary market, do you mean the secondary market that we operate in?
Yes, I'm talking about the distributors and then folks like yourself that are operating on the periphery of the component supply chain.
Yeah, I was asked that question a lot while I was out there. They're looking for solutions. So they want somebody to come and help. They're looking for help. They know what's happening isn't good for them. These are people just struggling for survival, so they just need some form of income. Most of them have come from the north, which is largely farming, and they've moved down to the south where this scrapyard is just to earn money to send home. So they're just, they're literally just doing whatever they can to survive. We're not directly able to solve this problem, but my hope and my goal is to bring awareness of it. So while we are redistributing chips, it's obviously circular. The chips have been made already. So if we go into a large tier one EMS and they've got loads of stock of brand new components, unused, untouched, traceable, we don't want that stuff adding to the waste, first and foremost. So our job is to redistribute that. And if whilst we are doing that, we can educate the world, and particularly these large manufacturers, it's their names, it's their brands that are on the products that I'm seeing out there. If we can encourage them to get involved in some way, we can then make a difference. So it's separate to our day-to-day business, but it could be fueled by that. So we're committed to putting some of our profits towards the cleanup and not just cleaning up the mess that's left, but actually creating jobs, schooling for kids, things like that. But if we can get very large manufacturers involved, I always talk about my phone. I'm an iPhone user and not an exclusively Apple person. I use all brands of stuff. I tend to love Samsung TVs, but these are brands that most of us use and most of us are familiar with. If it costs me $5 extra for an iPhone, I wouldn't care. I wouldn't even notice. Let's be honest. If you're paying over $1,000 for a phone, an extra $5 on that would make no difference whatsoever. But if that $5 got to Ghana, they could do incredible things with it. As I say, these guys are earning $2.50 a day, roughly. It's peanuts that they're earning. So, small amounts of money per item could really transform what's happening out there and create far better, more productive lives, more sustainable environments for us all. I mean, it's one planet, So moving our waste from the UK or from Europe or from the US to Ghana isn't the solution. It's still killing our world. And it's madness to me that this is still happening. They're driven to take our used goods because they can make money out of them. There is still a market for them, but there isn't here. A 10-year-old TV here is deemed useless. You can't get all the modern applications on it, things like that. So people are throwing out, in some cases, working TVs because they're just old. But to them, they're still valuable. So I understand the need and the want for those goods, but we certainly shouldn't be sending broken items to poorer countries.
So let's kind of bring that back to Component Sense. Okay. So you formed Component Sense in 2001, which was just in time for the dot-com bubble. No waste created from that, right? What did you learn from that experience?
Well, 2001 was just at the end, really. It was as the bubble was bursting. So we had the dot-com bubble. We had the millennium bug, if you're old enough to remember that. The millennium bug created enormous demand for IT particularly. So every computer in the land was being replaced because on the first of the new millennium, everything was going to crash. Planes were going to fall out of the sky. So entire industries.
Right, what we call Y2K.
Yeah, Y2K, absolutely.
Yeah.
So that created enormous demand. So we had crazy demand from Y2K or Millennium Bug, and we had crazy demand from mobile phones. Mobile phones were transitioning from being the great big brick that only rich people carried to the little Nokias that anyone could carry, and anyone could afford. So suddenly everybody had a phone, and that created enormous demand too. And it was very similar to what we've just seen. Anyone in the PCB world will have lived through 21, 22, where they just couldn't get components. So 99, 2000 was a replica of what we've just lived through, where you just could not get for love nor money the parts you needed to build your products. And in 2001, we had a crash, which was similar to what happened January 2023. So I started this business in the depths of that crash, that recession that followed the dot-com boom, man. But all this other electronic stuff was going on at the same time. So it was a perfect storm. It's usually a perfect storm like that. It's multiple things that create the mad demand plus the shortages and all the chaos that ensues with that. So yeah, we've just literally come through the same thing. So 2001, started the business because my clients, I worked in broadline distribution at the time, and my clients were coming to me with a massive excess problem, huge excess problem. Because in the shortage period, and the same thing happened this time, people were over forecasting to get some stock. So manufacturers, distributors quite often have a thing called allocation. And if you order 10,000 pieces a month of something and the supply is short, they might agree to give you 1,000 of, they'll allocate you 1,000 or 10% of what you've ordered. Buyers, thinking they're being super clever, increase their forecasts so that they can get the amount they need. Many of them don't seem to realise they've signed into NCNR contracts in that situation. So non-cancelable, non-returnable, non-refundable. And when the crash comes, and this is exactly what happened. I worked for a massive broadline company back in 2001. That company says, hey, all that stuff you ordered, here it is. And they just unload millions and millions of dollars worth of stock on you. And in the case of some of my customers here in Scotland at the time, they were struggling. They couldn't afford to buy, in some cases, 10 years worth of stock because they'd over forecasted to that degree, clearly assuming they could just push it out or change it or whatever. But no, they were forced to take the stock. And again, we're seeing that now. You know, we're calling and talking to people that have got an excess problem, and it's at least double what normal is. So normal is about 10% of revenue. So every company that builds or puts chips on boards is typically sitting on about 10% of their annual revenue tied up in slow-moving, excess, and obsolete stock. But at the moment, we're seeing that's at least double. So in a well-managed company, that's double. And in a poorly managed company, it can be many, many times. I mean, we are seeing 5 years, 10 years worth of stock in some factories. And of course, the product won't even be the same product in 10 years. The chances of you using those same devices in 10 years is pretty slim because the technology is constantly changing. So, yeah.
Yeah, if you look at Apple's 10K, their annual financials, they'll acknowledge that they have at any given time more than $10 billion in inventory on their books, and that there's always that risk that that inventory will go obsolete before they have a chance to sell enough phones or enough Macs to use it all up. Apple is a $100 billion plus company, with a $1 trillion market cap, so they can afford that risk. But to your point, it does tie up for many companies a lot of their cash in inventory, and it creates risk, right? So that's where component sense comes in. Let's talk a little bit about your typical customers, and then let's get into how your process works.
Yeah, so our typical customers are billion-dollar sites. We try to work with large sites. So it might be a multi-billion-dollar, multi-site company. It might be a single-site billion-dollar company. The reason we work with big companies is twofold. It's quality. We need to ensure the quality of the parts we're reselling. Everybody, I'm sure, is aware of the counterfeit challenges. We, from 2001 to 2007, we did do sourcing on the grey market. So we used to buy components on the grey market. And in 2007, we made a very strict decision not to do that because the counterfeit problem appeared about 2005 and it was really rampant by 2007. And we just didn't feel, with even the best anti-counterfeit technology, that we could absolutely assure our customers of counterfeit-free product if we were buying from the grey market, because you lose the links in the chain that give you that traceability. So we did make a decision back then, and it was about half our business, so it was a big chunk. It was a lot to lose, but we just felt that there was no way to absolutely guarantee counterfeit-free supply chain operating in that area. So we only buy from large OEM and EMS companies that can prove where they bought the product from. And we're typically looking for that to have come from, in most cases, direct supply, so usually straight from the chip maker, and in some cases, large, recognizable franchise distributors. So your Arrows, your Avnets, Future, places like that. So that's why we operate with the big companies from the quality point of view, but also we need to make the wheels go round. So if we want to sell that stock, we need to find a way to redistribute it. So the other big guys, if you like, aren't necessarily going to buy that stock. There's not much of an incentive for them to do so. So to find an incentive for somebody to buy that stock, it's price. So if we can take it from $1 billion company that's got really strong buying power, they're probably buying it at half the price of the 100 million turnover company that we're selling to. So there's scope to give them all their money back. We're trying to remove all excuses. We'll remove the risk, we'll give you all your money back, and we'll redistribute it downstream. So by taking it from $1 billion company and selling it to a $100 million company, everybody can win. So we can take a small margin in the middle, the owner gets all their money back, and in some cases actually solid profit, particularly in that 21-22 period, they were making really strong profit. Our margins remained much the same, but the guys that were selling the stock were demanding high prices. So, the guy in the middle often gets the blame for gouging and charging mad prices in those periods. But certainly in our case, we were still just trying to move stock. Our goal was always just to move stock and get it redistributed and into the hands of somebody that can use it. Because if it sits in a warehouse for 10 years, it's going to end up scrap.
Kenny, do you actually take delivery of the excess parts?
We do. So there, right at the very beginning, you talked about component exchange. That was actually my original company's name. So way back, that was the name I gave the company. And then I found another company using a very similar name in America. So I changed fairly quickly to Component Sense. So we didn't intend to. So our goal was to just help people redistribute stock. So find a buyer, find a seller, put the two together. But that was a bit naive, if I'm honest. At that time, I didn't realize just how difficult that was for a big company. They don't want to create hundreds and thousands of new suppliers on their system. Getting approval for a new supplier, if you're a billion-dollar company, takes ages, and it's a really cumbersome process. So
No, it's an act of God. It's
so nobody wants to do that, and that became clear quite quickly. So we realized we had to physically act as a middleman and take ownership of the stock. They also don't want any liability whatsoever. So if a very large company sells stock to us, they want us to take all the risk, all the liability. So we do that. So we take physical ownership of it. Often at the moment, we still bring it to the UK for inspection because we'd still, even though it's traceable, we still want to put it through. It's well over 100-point check. We take it through using microscopes and really getting in amongst the component. For two reasons. It's to absolutely ensure that we don't ever have counterfeit or inferior product. But two, to collect a beautiful database. We've got this most amazing database of known good stock. So your chips they vary much more than you think. They're made to 6 sigma, 3 parts per million failure. So they're made to incredibly high standards, but physically, they're not made to very high standards, not as high as you would imagine. So the variance in a particular device across a period of time and made in different factories is surprisingly wide. The texture, the content even of, when you do the XRF, you can get quite a variance even in the quantities of different substances that are inside that epoxy coating that seals the component, for example.
And Kenny, are you inspecting every part, or are you doing that on a sampling of per lot basis?
Yeah, it's sampling. Yeah, so I mean, as I say, the stuff we deal with, it's brand new, it's sealed packs, factory sealed. So it's sampling, but it's cataloging. We're really cataloging what known good devices look like so that we can detect anything if something odd came up.
Will you take possession of inventory prior to actually having a buyer for it?
Yeah, we work in a number of different ways. So, if it's a really huge site, so if it's $1 billion site, the best way to deal with it is our in-plant system. So in-plant, inside their factory, basically. So very large EMSs particularly, they don't want to move the stuff off-site. Because as soon as it goes off-site, somebody has to pay for it. So, somebody would have to pay in full for that stock. They often talk about obsolete or dead stock, which is 1% of revenue. So that's what most people are aware of when they talk about E&O, is the dead stock, the stuff they'll never use. But there is this other 9%, which is slow moving. It might take a year, 2 years to use up. That's the risk. That's just, you're well aware of the obsolete, the dead stock, but that 9% is obviously a much bigger number, but that's your future obsolete. That's your risk. So we're trying to get people to reduce that risk and move it on and get back to just in time. You don't want 2 years worth of stock. You want 6 weeks worth of stock maximum. So, get rid of the excess, give it to somebody that can use it now, and reduce your risk is the key.
So does this mean that you find yourself also susceptible to the component inventory cycles?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, our business changes from year to year depending on the cycle and where we are in the cycle. So in the peak period, getting people to release stock was tough. Even though they had masses of excess, there was a fear factor of letting stuff go. So companies would tend to hang on to it just in case. And that was at a time where they could literally have made 10 times their money on it. But, a lot of people were tending to hang on to it. And then, of course, the market collapses. They're now sitting on years' worth of inventory and they desperately want rid of it. But they paid a premium in that time. Even if you were buying it direct, you were paying a premium. So much, much harder to sell in that period. And that's where we are now. We're still in a situation of abundant stock. There's loads and loads of stock out there. If you want rid of stock right now, you're going to have to sell it, even as $1 billion company, probably below cost to incentivize a buyer to take it. So, we have to ride the waves that are in front of us is kind of what I talk about. We did that through that crazy period. We're now in a position where we're getting stock coming out of our ears and we're having to work really hard to shift it. So in-plant is the sort of premium product for those $1 billion sites. We will take it off-site too, if that's the client's preference. So if they want to consign it to us, we can take it physically off-site, clears up space. It is good because it allows us to manage it and ship it same day. So, we can give our customers a better, faster service that way. So that's pretty good. And we do buy for cash too. So, and that's the cycle. So, during the crazy period, we couldn't buy for cash because the prices were mad. When everybody's now in abundance and they're happy just to get rid of it and they might sell it relatively cheap, we can take a gamble and buy. We've spent millions in the last few years building up our stock because it's cheap to buy. So if somebody desperately wants rid of something, we'll buy a whole batch, put it into stock, and it might take 5 years before that stuff starts moving again.
Is everything warehoused in Scotland?
Our own warehouse is in Scotland, so our own physical space is here, but we do partner with DSV, so one of the largest logistics companies worldwide, and we store in their warehouses wherever possible, actually, because we don't want to move stuff unnecessarily across the world. So if it's in the States, why bring it to the UK to probably send it back to the States? It's one of our biggest markets, so you're moving stock unnecessarily. So wherever possible now, we're trying to keep it local. So we're in Alabama, we're in Vietnam, we're in Budapest. So, but we will, anywhere there's enough stock, we'll open up. And the DSV model allows us to do that with just 2 weeks' notice. We can literally create a store.
Yeah, so that answers my next question, which is if you're dealing with these billion-dollar companies, they're almost assuredly multinationals and they're pulling inventory from all over the world, not just from Europe.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so I mean, one supplier to us, somebody that wants rid of excess, could have stock in multiple sites, and that's not a problem. So the in-plant model was designed originally for a large EMS that's got about 40 sites globally, and it can operate in all of those sites. We talk about $1 billion sites, but about $500 million is the minimum, realistically, that's viable to put a physical human being on site to manage that stock.
Now, given some of the things that you've experienced, okay, so you have 20 plus years of helping companies find new homes for excess parts. You've been to Ghana, you've seen these waste dumps. You've had a firsthand look at all of the issues that are involved with excess components and just e-waste, right? Is there anything in particular that you've taken away from that you then go back to your customers and try to educate them or their buyers on insofar as managing their supply chains, knowing full well that you make your living off of their mistakes, right? I mean, their overbuys are your profit centers. But is there anything that you can take back from what you've seen and try to educate them so that they can better plan going forward to reduce their stock levels and get closer to just in time and narrow that supply chain?
Yeah, I mean, I've lived through this cycle a few times now. I've been in electronics since I was 16. I joined straight from school, went into an apprenticeship scheme, so I've been around a long time. I'm 56 now, so that is a very, very long time. Who knew I'd be 40 years in an industry? But yeah, I mean, I'm always trying to educate. I mean, in truth, when I'm out visiting clients, it's always about education. It's trying to highlight to them things they can't see. So if you're in a manufacturing plant, you've got all your metrics, the things that are important to you, but you're quite insulated. You're looking very much through blinkers. So yeah, I'm always trying to broaden the horizon. Like I said, that Ghana slide's been in my slide deck since 2007. So I've always talked about counterfeits. I've always talked about e-waste in that sense, or certainly for a very long time. And as I say, it used to fall on deaf ears. The younger generation coming up, we're starting to see managers in their 30s that are really fired up by improving sustainability, and that's great. But I had a meeting just last week, and as soon as we got into that, you could see I think there was 5 people on the other end, and it's a company that does talk about sustainability, but you could see them glaze over very quickly. So I don't know if you use this expression in the States, but you're flogging a dead horse if you're going down that route. So we've got to stick to our principles. We want to help redistribute. We want to help avoid waste. But if they're not interested, there's no point in us pushing that narrative. We've just got to encourage them into our fold in the ways that matter to them. And as I say, that is typically money. So if we can give them all their money back, why would they not redistribute it? So we just try and take away all the barriers. We make it easy. We install our own person in their site, or we pay their person. Sometimes they prefer to have their own person on site for security reasons, and that's completely understandable. But we can pay for that with the proceeds of moving the excess. So it costs them nothing. We literally try and remove all barriers because our goal is to redistribute stock. And if we can encourage people to do that, then we're doing our little bit to save the planet. We plant trees for every order, 2 trees for every order, 1 for the buying customer, 1 for the selling. We're wanting to physically spend money in Ghana helping clean up the area. Until you see the images, the job out there is huge. It's way bigger than we can do on our own. But we're hoping and really believing now that we're starting to hear the right sounds coming from some of the biggest electronic manufacturers, that they are coming on board. And I do believe that we'll convince some very large customers soon to actually help us make inroads in there. And we're not looking to become a charity and get on the ground, but we're looking to support the charities that are there. There's charities that are just crying out for help.
Mm-hmm.
And as I say, $5 on my iPhone is nothing. And I don't know anyone that would have an issue if $5 went to cleaning up the environment globally and giving people proper jobs, safe jobs, and a livelihood that feeds their family.
What metrics does Component Sense use to track its recycling, right? The number of components that you've processed from one seller to, a future buyer.
Yeah, we do track those. Our marketing team talk about them regularly. I think 35 million off the top of my head, I think is the figure of components we've saved from landfill at the moment.
35 million.
Yeah. That's the number that's in my head. I'm sure that's right. So we track that. We're currently working with some companies that are literally measuring the carbon footprint of every component. So we're trying to get to a point where we can literally measure by component what the cost of that component was. And it's a change in attitude. So, most companies are financially driven. Most companies are on the stock exchange. They've got to report their figures, and the figures that are currently most important are still very much about cash and money and profit. We're starting to see companies reporting on their carbon footprint and other sustainable numbers, and this is going to become more important. The cost of a component isn't just the cost of a component, it's the cost to the planet. The average mobile phone uses something like 2/3 of the elements in the periodic table. So we're drawing all those elements out of the earth, we're combining them together using heat, light, power to then create these devices. So the cost isn't just the $1.20 or whatever, it is the cost of all that work, all that pooling resources and combining them into these wonderful devices that, make our lives better. But you can't look at that just in dollars and cents. You've got to look at the whole picture. And if we can, in its simplest form, if we can get a component that would otherwise end up scrap used, the resources have been pooled. We've already pulled all those resources out of the earth. We've combined them together. For that to go back to the earth unused, to me, is kind of criminal. And that's the bit that we're most focused on. So, I don't want to buy a yacht or a plane. I've got no real interest in having some crazy fancy lifestyle. I don't want to
Not a
send
sailor,
rockets.
huh?
I don't want to send rockets to Mars. It's the common sense bit in our name. It's literally, let's just not do stupid things. If we can redistribute that stuff and get into the hands of somebody that can use it, that's easy. And you said right at the beginning that you knew somebody that tried to do this and had this idea, but it is hard. I'm 24 years doing this now, and it is hard. It's really hard changing people's attitudes and trying to get them to think a bit differently. But God, it's so simple. It's common sense. It's just, why would you stockpile stuff, hold it for 10 years, pay to store it, and then chuck it? Bin it. It's crazy.
So the documentary that Kenny referred to earlier is called E-Waste Graveyard, My 14 Days in... Kenny, I'm going to let you say the name of the city in Ghana that you were in.
Agbogbloshie.
Exactly.
It's very, very hard to pronounce.
It's even harder to spell. You can find that on YouTube. Using the search on YouTube, type in E-Waste Graveyard. Kenny, finally and most importantly, who do you prefer, Big Country or Teenage Fan Club?
Ooh, I was never really a massive Big Country fan. They're obviously local, but I prefer the band before Big Country, the Skids.
The Skids, right?
I don't know
Yeah,
if you know
Stuart
the
Adamson's
Skids.
band. Yeah, before that, yeah.
Yeah. So Stuart Adamson's first band was the Skids, and that was more my style, a little bit livelier than Big Country.
Fair.
Part of that sort of punk revolution back then.
All right. Well, if I make it over there, we'll go try to find one of their their cover bands.
Yeah, I heard they're kicking around. Actually, I think obviously Stuart died. Unfortunately, he died quite a while ago. But there is a bit of the band still going, apparently.
Kenny, I very much enjoyed talking with you today. I appreciate you coming on, telling us a bit about Component Sense and your business model, and also some of the things that you've seen and experienced, which help kind of motivate you and your team, I'm sure, to keep pressing on. You can find Component Sense on the web at componentsense.com. Very easy, very simple. Kenny, I'd like to thank you for coming on and joining us today. Any parting words for our listeners?
I've enjoyed it. It's been good fun to chat over some of our history and some of the plans we have for the future. So, yeah, if anyone wants to talk to us, contact us via the website, phone numbers on there. Yeah, there's any number of ways you can contact us. I'm on LinkedIn and every social media thing you can ever think of. So hopefully you'll find me. There's a very long-haired rocker with the same name, and he's got a bit more power than me on Google. So I have no hair. So if you find a guy with long hair, it's not me.
Got it. We've got to look for the bald Kenny McGee.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very good. Okay, for PCB Chat, this is Mike Buteau. Have a nice day.